Good morning, all. So I'm going to just try to cover some of the information that I intended to cover with you in class and hope that we don't have quite such a bad connection ever again if we're on Zoom or that we'll be back in person. So just really quickly, I've just got quite a few little notes here in a file that I can use to kind of indicate some of the tools that may be helpful to you. The first thing that I wanted to talk about was importing the sets of colors, and you'll see that some of these color sets are familiar to you now that you have looked at those Adobe Illustrator colors. And these are just a couple of the color sets from some of the historical colors that I liked a lot. You can import these as a picture, similar to what you did with your Perry Culper fragment, by adding a PDF graphic, and you would use the picture command to add that. It's easier to import something from an AI file. Adobe Illustrator and Rhino will share some capacity to move files back and forth, and so they sort of understand aspects of each other's logic. And so when I imported this, it asked if I wanted to treat the colors as hatches. And it doesn't really serve me that well for them to be hatches, but by doing that, I'm able to kind of go into a hatch menu and deal with them as hatches if I want to, as solid hatches with a particular color. But the way that I have found that's easier to color code our diagrams is to go to our materials, right, the toothpaste tube. Let me make this a little bit bigger so you can see it. By clicking on the plus key, I can add a new material. I want to add paint. Paint is the way that I have added things without any kind of dimension or texture. They just sort of go on as pure color, although you can affect their reflectivity. Here's my new paint color here. Go down here, double click on my color, and I can choose the eyedropper. And the good thing about the eyedropper is it's not very smart. It literally is going to pick anything that it sees. You know, I could come over here and pick my favorite gray. I can pick this red. I can pick any of these colors. One thing that you'll notice is if you change your view, even the quality of the colors of these images change. So right now I have this on a shaded wireframe, they stay the same, but watch what happens if I go to the rendered view. It suddenly thinks they're, something else, like a real material in the light, and they become these sort of smushy pastel colors, which I don't like at all by comparison to the rich historic colors, right? Big difference. So be sure that you're on one of the simpler kind of viewing defaults in order to get those kind of colors. That's how we're going to add those new colors to our palette. The other thing that you can do to simplify your tasks, if you have a set of colors that you're reusing over and over, you'll see that I've given them some names. So this is line 1, color 1, right? L11. The 5 of them go together. So if I can click on this and I can go save to file, what it's going to assume is that I want to go into this set of render contents, right? This set of materials that I have within my Rhino defaults. And if I go click on paint, I want it to be matte. And I've inserted a new folder and I've stuck all of these colors into this folder. So if I'm ever looking for this set of colors again, I've now got them defaulted. I could go into another file and upload this set of colors. So, just sort of saving some of this work for a future date. So let's cancel that. Okay, so that's all I wanted to add about the colors. If you are not seeing the right kinds of commands for this, remember we've got the properties where we're looking at the properties of an object, right? This is a hatched object. And I've got the panels where I can control my layers, my display settings. This is a nice one too if I'm in the middle of a command and I get confused by what the command is going to do or what I should do next. I can click on this question mark, and that's Rhino Help. So right in the middle of a command, if I click on Help, it's going to take me to that command and help me find my way through it. These are our layer states. Remember, we're going to set up particular sets of layers that I like together. The shaded view is going to allow me to see my material so I can see my objects a little more clearly. But remember, this is where I'm going to set up sets of layers that I like together. When we click back into the layers, you'll see that some of them are hidden, some of them are revealed. So layers, layer states. My box edit, if I clicked on an object, I can start to edit that object. My materials, where I can drop down and apply the material, assign to object. So, but that's not really what I want my diagram to look like. So if I have kind of gotten down a road and changed the color or changed some property of an object inadvertently, I can always sort of march back. But I can also click on this, and when I go to my properties, I can start to see, you know, some of the characteristics of this object. I'm getting some sort of weird information about custom colors. I'm just going to go back by layer. But if I knew that I wanted this object to look like that object, I can go to match. I can click on that object and it'll say, oh, well, you know, which characteristics do you want to match? So if I just say match, it'll take me back to a kind of matching set. This can be very useful. Okay, we're going down all sorts of interesting roads. So we've got the box edit, we've got the materials, and then this is my libraries. Again, I have taken those paint swatches that I created and I put them under paint, so I can still even find them here. Here's my paint. I've got, it's under the matte paints. Here's my AI set, and now I've got all of those paints together. Okay, so that's item one. That's dealing with those colors. Again, that's kind of a high-level detail for you guys getting at the beginning of our sort of Rhino experience, but let's just go ahead and go forward with that. So I've got all of these layers selected except for my notes. We did just look at the view settings, but just to kind of hit that a little bit more specifically, when I am sort of viewing my object, some of the view settings can be very memory and computationally heavy, and so we really want to work with the lightest and most effective viewing strategy for, you know, what we're beginning to do. So up here, when I'm in Rhino, under my views, I can change those view settings, and I think you've probably already experimented with that. Right now I'm in the wireframe, which allows me to look through and see, you know, whatever is made visible in my layers. It allows me to see kind of everything through the other pieces, even if they are rendered as solid paints. Shaded is going to give me a little bit better indication of what is, you know, what is a surface and what is just a curve. But if I go to render, that's the one of the heavier kind of representations, because it's going to start to factor in an idea that there is light in this view and that three-dimensional objects will have shade and shadow. So it can be a little bit heavier. This is a simple object, so not really a factor. Ghosting can be interesting, particularly if you're looking at a three-dimensional object. You're trying to look, you know, through something which is solid or where you have objects behind other objects. The ghosting allows you to sort of see through the foreground into the background. You know, again, our wireframe does just as well on this simple object, but you can experiment and look at these a little bit more. Mostly what I wanted to do with you guys today was to talk about the planar surface and to go into the layout. So we have made some objects. You definitely want to close your objects if possible. So if I have an object and I don't like its construction, I need to rebuild it, I can always explode that object. So I just went from an object which is a rectangle to an object made of 4 lines. You know, I can start to move those lines around and you know, sort of change my goals, change my sort of composition. And once I do that, I can rebuild my objects. So these are still separate things, right? But I can join them back together. Now I've got, let's go ahead and join these. And I can, you know, pick my tool, and it looks like it's successful. When I click on it, I see that it's an open curve. It's open because it's not closed in this area. One thing I can do is either explode these, fillet it, rejoin it, but I can also type in close curve. Let's see what we get there, and it closed my curve for me, right? So now when I click on that closed curve, it's done. So that can be handy as I'm sort of rebuilding things and changing their configuration. We haven't talked much about the gumball, but hopefully Nick did. You can sort of stretch objects in either direction. You can make them smaller. This is scaling in 1 dimension, right? But if I want to scale in 2 dimensions, I want it large uniformly, I can hold my Shift key and kind of zoom in and out. I can also, let's make this a little smaller, I can also use my gumball to move in the orthogonal directions, X and Y directions. And once I click on my shift, I can get out of those simple X and Y's. Playing with the gumball, when the gumball is going to default to the middle of this object, which can be a little bit of a nuisance. You can definitely move the gumball for certain kinds of activities. We'll get into that a little bit more later. But to relocate the gumball, I click on this and I basically tell it, where I want it to be. Now my gumball is here. So if I wanted to, kind of do some more specific kinds of alignments, it can help to put the gumball in a more specific place. I can reset the gumball back to the middle. So this is, one way to control the gumball. Another thing that you can do that looks a little similar but is totally different is I can begin to control specific points. So, we know this is a curve, but the curve is described by points because of the way I constructed it. And if I wanted to just alter a point, I'm holding my shift in this case to click on that point, and now I'm not moving the object, I'm just controlling the point. And I can begin to kind of play with that point and sort of change points. Now I've actually got 2 points and they're both going to start to move at once. So you can see the power of this, right? If I wanted to click out of it and just get back to 1 point, hit shift, now I can kind of move that down. So you can see that this can be a pretty powerful way of controlling our NURB curve, right? And really what I've been doing, I've got the spline, but I'm changing these control points. I'm changing the amplitude of the curve in both of these cases, all 3 of these cases, or I'm relocating a kind of vertex. Interesting way to kind of modify your objects. If I click on this curve, the other thing I can do is add a surface. Our command is planar surface. And you can see now that there's a surface that's running in between there, and the surface is the thing that I can color. I can't color this simple curve, but when I click on it, it's going to say, oh, do you want to select the curve or do you want to select the surface? Let's select the surface. We'll move it out just for reference. If I click on this, I can't really do anything materially with it. I can't add materials to something which doesn't have a kind of palette or a kind of canvas for the surface, but I can add materials to a surface. I can click on here, assign to the object. And now if I go back in here to my view, with my rendered view, I should be able to see that it has the paint. Mostly we want to talk about setting up our layouts. It is not the most intuitive set of operations, but it can be really powerful. So in the past, I think the protocol or the conventional wisdom said, get this stuff out of here and move into Adobe Illustrator. And we definitely can do a lot of really beautiful effects with representations in Adobe Illustrator. We can control our line types, our line weights, etc. But it's a little bit onerous in terms of the numbers of things that you have to modify, and Adobe Illustrator doesn't necessarily keep things kind of in the same conditions. So if you've gotten used to kind of grabbing this as an object, when we go into Illustrator, I kind of lose some of the control. So all of these objects might be separated from each other. If I wanted to go change the line weight, I might have to change each of these line weights at the same time. So there are ways built into Rhino to allow you to do all those things that we have done in Illustrator. Again, it takes a little bit of practice because Rhino has a lot of depth of control. And so controlling the controls can be a little bit challenging. So let's get right on that. If I want to go into my layouts, I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to make sure that all of my layers are highlighted. And you can do this different ways, but if I'm going to create several layouts and I'm expecting to have different information on each of those layouts, if I do not have them turned on, those layers will not be available to me. I'm going to make a layout and then I'm going to begin to turn layers off that I don't want in that layout. And that way I have much more control for the layout. One of the reasons I learned to type all these commands is because it did work for both the Mac and the Windows version. So if I type layouts, it's going to say, do you have a name? And let's say this is sample. It's going to ask me for my details. And the detail, basically, if you think of the layout as a sheet, the detail is a window. And the windows are the numbers of drawings that you want to occur on the sheet. So you can imagine you could make a big layout and have a plan, an elevation, and a section all in the same sheet. So just, to kind of go further with that point, let's say I wanted 3 layouts, so I wanted 3 different drawings. I can set up the size. Some of these sizes are sizes that you would have from plotters, so larger, kind of 24 by 36. Let's make it a big one, why not? And let's say it's a landscape orientation, but you can see that it's giving me the default in inches. I'm going to apply. My new one should be here on the bottom. So here's my new page, 24 by 36. It's got 3 details. Each of these are those 3 detail windows. And the first thing it's going to assume is that I want to see everything, right? I want to like show the entire drawing, which is a terrible idea very clearly. But what I'm going to do is go in and control what I see within this window by zooming in and out to capture the view that I want, by typing in and controlling the scale, and by turning on and off the layers that I want to see for this particular view. So we'll come back to this big one later. I just wanted to show you that again. Similar to our other commands, if I go in and I click on the plus at the bottom of this display, it will add another, an option for another layout. So let's just go ahead and go see the layouts that I already have predetermined. So I have a page, say I want a layout. I may set up a page to have certain information that I want to repeat. So the first thing I want to do is think, how many layouts am I dealing with? Do I want to add a title block maybe? That's a kind of fairly conventional practice idea, but maybe I put my name, maybe I took the title of the project, maybe I put some north arrows, maybe there's a graphic that I want on every page, and I will build that into the page. And then if I want to duplicate a page, I will start off with my, my kind of infrastructure for the page. Maybe I only have one page and I'll build all of that. If I want to then duplicate that page in order to set up additional pages with all of that information, I can either copy and paste. That would be a conventional way to do it. But I can also hit Alt and drag. That's our way to get duplicates of objects. So I've just duplicated by Alt dragging. But you'll see that each of these layouts, essentially, I've got my secondary, I've got my tertiary, I've got the composite, and each of these is set up basically as, originally they were copies of each other, but what you will have noticed is I'm looking at exactly the same object. This is my drawing that has all the information, but I'm selectively turning on and off information. Okay, most important point. What you will want to know, again, about this space is that we've got our model space where we're working. This is our layout space, and our layout space is going to look some version of this. Within the layout space, I've got 3 different conditions. I've got the sheet, which looks like this sort of gray piece of paper. And when I'm clicked on the sheet, I'm going to get some controls. I'm going to name the layout. I can go in and edit. I can change its size. I'm going to keep it right now. Maybe I change it to a landscape. This is a portrait. Okay. So I can control those things when I am clicked on the sheet. You will have found by now that text, I have a text control. And let's just say XYZ and apply. I can do text anywhere. So that may be how you're going to want to change some of these defaults that you'll want from page to page. You'll see it's only shown up on this one page. If I wanted to repeat it from page to page, I can simply copy and paste. But if I was setting up the page initially, I'd set up those kind of components that I wanted to be in the same position, like maybe the detail frame. And then I would simply Alt drag in order to repeat this. We've got the sheet, we've got the detail. You can see the frame is highlighted, so I can change the detail. Like this detail isn't really fitting my full frame, so I can stretch it out. I can move it on the page. Let's go ahead and click back on the detail. So when my gumball's in the middle, I can move the detail. If I want to resize it, I can click on one of these size points and I can begin to just sort of stretch it. But that is these are some of the controls of the frame itself. Right now, my frame is locked, but what is locked about it is not its size, but its scale. So we've been working on a 5 by 8 object, and I want on this 8.5 by 11 piece of paper to print my object at a 1-to-1. And one of the most important things when we're beginning to represent pieces of architecture is dealing with scale. What is the sort of ratio that I am using to shrink the representation of a very large object to the size of a page? So I'm going to use some kind of a ratio. Right now, with a 5 by 8 object, I can use 1-to-1, and that works great. So that's what we're going to focus on for right now, is the 1-to-1. But this is where I would control that. If I unlock this ratio, just for example, and I said, I want 1 inch on the page to equal 3 inches on the module. That is a ratio. It's a weird ratio, but I can do it. If I hit enter, you can see that it zoomed out. Now this is some kind of a 1:3 ratio. So my object has become smaller. When we represent buildings, we want them to be small enough to fit on a page. So the ratios we will use, we're going to talk a lot more about this in a couple of weeks, but the ratios we would use might be 1 to 12, which would basically mean 1 inch equals 1 foot, right? Or 1 inch equals 12 inches. But let's put it back to 1 to 1. For this exercise, we want 1 to 1. You can see I've already kind of positioned this view. Actually, let me go through and kind of change it. Now that it's unlocked, you can see that I'm zooming in and out of my view. So when it comes in, it assumes I want everything. I really don't. So I'm just going to use my scrolling button on, on my mouse. And now I'm too big. I will have set this up. You can change the size of the window. And now when I'm looking at it, I want to get back to the scale of 1 to 1. So I want to be more precise than that. I did this scrolling by double clicking inside the space. Right now it's sort of relating this frame to the model space. Here's my sheet. Here's my detail, and I can move my detail window around. But when I double click, I'm in the third space. Now I'm in the model space. And I'm going to want to zoom, position my object. Let's go here. And I want to go back out now to the frame. And by some miracle, I have landed on a 1 to 1, and that's what I want. So once I have that, this is positioned well within the frame, I'm going to lock it. Okay, so now when I go back into this space, if I zoom in and out with my scroll button, it's not zooming in and out of the model, now it's zooming in and out of the sheet. But I can still go back in and modify things. If I wanted to be sort of crazy, I could move things around. I can still get in and sort of interface with the model. But just to reiterate, controls on the sheet, controls of the detail, and at some point when I set up my ratio, very importantly, when I set up my ratio in my view, let's go ahead and lock that, and then controls of the model itself. So there's one more button that I forgot to mention. When we're looking at our panels, it's going to look a little bit different than the panels that are available in your model space. So this one is our layers, model layers. And this one is called Layout and Detail Layer Information. So where we're going to control the visibility of the layers is using this button. If you click here, it still appears that all of the layers are turned on for this detail. But if I go to this detailed button for my layer information within the layout, you'll see that some of the layers are turned off. And that's how I'm getting this different view of the model. Same here. I'm on my detailed layer information and some of my buttons are turned off. And the other thing that I wanted to show you in this space is I can start to control the print colors. So this square on the left is my display color, right? You can see that this sort of blue line is showing up as blue. But I may not want to print in blue, and most of the time I don't. So what I would do there is basically come over here and say that this rotated square is actually my printout color. In any case, if I change that to black, I will still see the object as blue in the representation here on the screen, but it will print as black. So I can do that here and set those as my defaults. The other thing I can do is when I go to print, I can sort of give it the information that I only want black and white lines, and so that's doable too. But you can see right now I had not changed any of those print colors, but I can sort of change that by just selecting the color that I want. This is an additional detail. If you want to add a detail up here in your controls, you're going to just see a kind of plus. I can add a detail right there. So again, it assumes I want to see everything, kind of a crazy detail. So when I go into that, I'm going to want to sort of navigate to what I want to see. Let's see, I want to see that, right? But you can see all of this text is acting crazy. It's a longer story, but let's say that that's my desired view. If I click back out on the frame, I can lock it, and now I'm kind of there. And now if I double click here, I can control what I want to see, and I can turn off things like notes for the lecture, right? So we don't need to see that. So here's a detail. I'm back in. I can start to intervene with my model, move things around a little bit. Here's a messy one, right? What has happened is that it's picked up an extra layer. If you add a layer when you're in your model space, it's going to just add it to every layout. So when I added this lecture text, I did this to sort of show you how to control it. You come back in and you're like, oh my God, look at all that text. Double click inside here. Again, now I'm seeing what is actually showing inside this detail. There's my notes. Back to square one. So that, because it's a new layer, it just assumes, okay, I'm going to put it everywhere. I want you guys to see, these kinds of notes are the types of things that you might put on your page, right? Again, just text. This is a 1-to-1 ratio, or 1 inch equals 1 inch. Okay, so that's sort of the gist of it. It's really a lot of getting used to it. Let's go through the exercise just one more time. Sheet, detail, controls of the space inside the detail, right? So I can zoom in, I can begin to turn things off. Let's get that text out of the way. I can zoom in and say, I really want to focus on this color. I don't know why I would, but once I have sort of positioned that, I'm going to come back out to the sheet, click on the detail, lock it in place. That one's done.